I am going to call to order the school committee meeting of Wednesday, February 13th, 2019. Mrs. Burns, for the record, if you could make note that all members are present and accounted for. Okay. Our first item of business, if you could join me in our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for coming out on an unexpected snowy evening. Wasn't expecting to see that. The first item on our agenda this evening you'll see listed is our budget hearing. This is something that we do on an annual basis. We're doing it a little bit differently than we've done in the past. For those of you who have been around a little while, we've started with our regular agenda, and then we've broken it at 7:30 for the budget. This year, we're going to lead with the budget. And just again, for those of you who may not have been here before, Dr. Brand is going to make a presentation on his recommended budget. The school committee members will have an opportunity to ask questions, make comments. I will also call upon any community member that would like to comment or ask questions about the budget. And then if all goes well with our discussion, the school committee will take a vote. From there, we'll move into the rest of our agenda. Okay? And with that, Dr. Brand, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I'll start. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Just trying to deal with a couple of technical difficulties, but I'll get started nevertheless. It is with great pleasure that I have the chance to present to you as your superintendent my first recommended budget for the Wilmington Public Schools. As I have said on repeated occasions, well, budgets indeed are all about numbers. I really do believe that the budget of a school district respectfully captures an important story. A story that speaks to the fiscal resources that at the present time are believed to be necessary to operate our programs and services to best meet the needs of our students here in Wilmington. This evening is intended to be the public hearing of the budget proposal for fiscal year 2020, or fiscal year 20, or FY20 as is often referred in the accompanying documents that are included in the school committee packet both this evening as well as previous packets to this point in time. While this presentation this evening amounts to a relatively brief capture of the content, it's indeed the case that this presentation represents many, many months of planning and conversations with those school and district leaders throughout the Wilmington Public Schools, many of whom are here this evening, and I thank them very much for their support and for their attendance tonight. I do also want to extend to them my appreciation for their hard work and their contributions to helping establish clarity around what reasonably they have identified to be the respective needs at the present time for programs, schools, and services necessary to maintain the commitment that we in the district have for our families and, of course, our students. I know well that this is not easy work, trying best to predict the total needs that are needed some 8 months from now. While there's indeed some predictability around the necessary services, there is also a real fluidity to some of the necessary fiscal demands that are placed upon school systems, and ours is no exception, and that those changes can result in an influx of students not planned for, legal responsibilities to deliver services that perhaps we had not expected, or a system failure that requires an unplanned additional expense. Thus, we do the very best we can to build a reasonable budget that tries to identify the resource needs in a modest way in terms of our awareness that ultimately, of course, the town's citizens will hopefully support. The total budget for fiscal year 20 presented here this evening represents a total budget request of $41,939,603. This equates to a 4.0% increase in spending over our current fiscal year, or the equivalent of just over $1.6 million, respectively. The presentation this evening does not include any new content from that which the school committee has seen previously, but nevertheless, as part of this hearing, an effort to try and briefly recap the proposal that's included in this FY20 budget to this point in time. First off, education, it cannot be stated enough, is very much, of course, a people business, and WPS is absolutely no different. As you will note, total salaries for the fiscal year 20 budget recommendation goes towards supporting almost 480 full-time equivalent staff that provide services to our students day in and day out. The staff that this budget supports goes towards our therapists, our administrative assistants, of course, our teachers, counselors, building leaders, and educational assistants, just to name a few. In sum total, this total operating budget necessitates that approximately 78% of this total budget goes towards securing the resources necessary to support our staff to be here in September of next fiscal year. While this commitment, of course, is essential, it also does present right out of the gate, if you will, in our planning, an important adjustment that this budget plan needs to account for. Given that just to roll over, if I may use that term, from our current staffing to next year necessitates over $1.1 million, or 3.75% increase from the current year. So that is to say, if everything remains the same or status quo, just to open our doors in September, as I sometimes might refer to it as, requires an increase in our budgetary resources of just a little over $1.1 million. However, I think it's also vital to know that our leadership team takes careful and deliberate steps to carefully analyze our needs, and that is important for the community to note. As we try and make adjustments where we think we are able to, and as you have heard before previously, and again to take this opportunity tonight to stress, there have been adjustments in terms of personnel in this fiscal plan as it stands currently. Case in point is the plan reductions that have been identified both here in the slide, in the content material that you have, based upon enrollment at a number of our schools throughout the district. A key piece of information, as you might imagine, and probably I hope would anticipate, we are carefully tracking all of the time. So personnel changes is the first large category. The next slide here provides a deeper dive of the salary-related changes, and as can be seen, the respective breakdown of our contractual commitments. Just to highlight a few, just a little bit over $419,000, $419,316 to be specific, for steps and lanes, as we term it, and those are spelled out in our contractual commitments to our various employee groups. $832,943 for actual salary increases, again according to contract provisions that we have through our collective bargaining process. And as you can see, some of the other salary-related expenditures upon which this budget plan is built. I won't go through all of them, but you can see in sum total sitting at 3.5% increase from the current fiscal year 19. Of course, there is also another side to this story as it relates to what we broadly term non-salary changes, over and above that almost 80% commitment to personnel. And this slide here, again, in an effort to try and be brief, with much more information that is included, of course, in the budgetary materials in the packet and is posted online, as highlighted in this other 20%. A key piece of the story as we think about next fiscal year, as we've touched upon previously, is our commitment to contending with our rise in special education tuitions, or out-of-district tuitions, as we sometimes refer to it, and that is just a little bit over $387,000. Again, a key piece to be mindful of. As I've said before, this is certainly in no way insignificant. This amounts easily to approximately the equivalent of 5 or so full-time teachers. And again, this is a legal requirement, as I know many are well aware. Transportation, transportation is also rising. Again, just to highlight that, at $43,200. This does not reflect a change in the total number of buses that we operate in district, but rather is a reality check on the fact that all of our contracts, just as this is in the case in of our needs to maintain our households, are going up every year. $43,200 just to maintain the current bus fleet that we have in place right now. Collectively, the non-salary changes result in a total commitment of $9,143,745, or a 5.56% increase in non-salary changes from the current fiscal year. So in sum total, to weave this all together, if you will, in terms of what you're looking at as a budget before you for consideration, is highlighted in this slide entitled FY20 Recommended Budget. You can see the salary. I won't read all of those numbers, but certainly a comparison for FY19 on the left-hand side of the slide, moving towards the middle, highlighting the salary and non-salary, and then the total budgetary request for the FY20 budget. You can see here highlighted the change in real dollars, and then the percentage change, rolling up to a 4.0% increase over fiscal year 19, or the current year that we're in. Finally, a key piece, a lot of numbers, a lot of lines here, of course, but just certainly goes, I can't go without saying and highlighting upon the capital requests that are also included in this proposal. You can see a highlight of many of them here. This view is consistent with our efforts to try and plan out as best we can for capital needs going forward. It's not perfect, things do change, but it does highlight our commitment specifically and largely around technology that certainly falls to the district to try and maintain a piece that we can't forget as well, nor can the community. Highlights within this capital amount that total $605,000 include $100,000 that's being planned for middle school wireless upgrade, $180,000 for middle school projector replacement, those are classroom projectors, $100,000 for a new data center upgrade for the district, and $100,000 for laptop replacements as part of the replacement cycle at the north and the west. In closing, I want to take this opportunity and thank the town manager for his collaboration and his partnership as we work to establish this budget. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Paul Ruggiero, Assistant Superintendent of Administration and Finance, and Ms. Jackie Raffi, who is also here this evening, our Assistant Director of Administration and Finance, for all of their leadership around pulling this information together. And with that, I or Paul would be happy to answer any questions that you might have this evening.
Mr. Ragsdale.
One thing that I think might be useful for many people is to understand the distinction between salary increases and step and lane changes. Just a little bit how that works.
Sure. So in the contracts, there's various steps. So each year, a teacher, as an example, I'll use a teacher in this example. 1 year might be hired at a bachelor's step 1. The next year, they would move up to a bachelor's step 2. So that's considered a step increase. And each of those steps have a different rate associated with them. A lane change would be if a teacher, again in this example, took graduate credits and earned 15 credits, they would then move from a bachelor's lane to a bachelor 15 lane. So it's moving across the lanes. We have a bachelor, bachelor 15, master, master 15, 30, and so forth. So those are lanes. So teachers, as they get more credits, can move lanes, and then each year they move a step. So that's the step and lane. Salary increases contractual obligations based on negotiated contracts.
Any other comments or questions from school committee members? Mrs. Burns.
I just want to thank you again for such a comprehensive budget that I very much look forward to another year, hopefully ending in the black, especially with how we're targeting the technology within our schools, especially at the middle school, and how that is just going to be we know when we brought in technology, it would be an ongoing cycle within our capital expenses. But I, after all these years, I do want to thank you and Jackie, because I know the time involved in crunching this and just the dedication with regards to trying to take all the wish lists from the schools and prioritizing them so that everybody's needs are met to some capacity. And I just want to, again, echo what Dr. Brand said and thank you for all your time and effort in coming up with such a comprehensive budget plan.
Please.
Thank you, MJ. And I want to thank again all the administrators, and truly it's been a pleasure working with Dr. Brand and Dr. Regan the first time going through it. They don't know how I do things, and I figure out how they want it done. So I no longer have the last say in how
That year and a half gave you a lot of freedom.
Yeah. But I think the process worked very well, very collaboratively.
Wonderfully.
give and take, and that's the way it should be. And then the relationship with the town, again, as strong as ever, just working with them, and, it's one community. Well, it's, for the education, and the town really supports the school, so that's all. Thank you.
Any other, Mr. Ragsdale?
Just one final comment, that at the beginning, Dr. Brandon, you said it's a lot of numbers in the budget, but that it's really about, students and people, and I just want to play off of that for 1 second, that a school budget is much more than a financial document, that it's a policy document, that all of the things that we want to do as a matter of policy need to be paid for, they need to be implemented in the budget, and so one of the reasons that I think we can support this budget wholeheartedly is that some of the priorities that we have, whether it's social and emotional learning that requires adjustment counselors and school psychologists, as well as the programming, the curriculum that we've discussed before that we need to buy and deploy in the schools, and so forth, that these things need to be reflected in the budget and are, and so that this is something that will, not just let us open our doors next September, but move us towards some of the goals that we've, as a matter of policy, set our eyes on.
And thank you for the comment, and I couldn't agree more. And it's also with optimism, looking ahead, of course, the reality of taking steps towards establishing our new district strategic plan, and within that, the identification of priorities. To the degree that some of those might require fiscal resources, this is, I think, an important opportunity for us as a district going forward to even further bolster the great presentation and materials that Mr. Ruggiero provides to you, but also that tie-in and clarity around how or in what way are these resources helping support our strategic plan going forward. And so there's a good convergence here, I think, moving forward to do just what you're talking about, and continuing to come back to the fact that it's not just opening the doors, it's not just paying salaries, but there are also other aspects that will go towards trying to achieve our overall ends and goals, and they have to come back to what this fiscal plan is looking to support. So it's an important piece, and I recognize that, not just for the committee, but also, I think, for the community at large.
Mrs. Barnes?
Thank you. Just one quick question. And knowing that with Governor Baker's initiatives with this upcoming budget as well with regards to Chapter 70 funding, and his I don't want to say attempts because I don't think that's the right, his outlook to increase that funding, how would that additional resource, granted, I don't think it's a huge, but I think it's significant enough that would be beneficial. How would that funding, is that funding reflective in how we created this budget? Or would that be something that we never know what's going to be released until it's released. So I was wondering how what he's proposing is reflective in the budget that we will be voting on. How does that work? I'm not sure.
So the governor's proposed budget, looking at that, we really get what they call minimum aid. So every district's kind of held harmless, if you will. So you get the same aid year to year, and then they give you a minimum increase, certain districts. The governor's budget is $20 per pupil. So our Chapter 70, based on the governor's budget, increased about $65,000. That money's budgeted within the town manager's budget as far as all the funds that flow. It's a little north of, I think, 11 million something. But that's factored into the town manager's budget. Now, again, the budget's going to go through many iterations, has to go through the House, the Senate, and so forth. So who knows what it's going to end up being. I believe the town manager, and when he spoke last week, or whenever it was, that Monday, they had projected like a $25 per pupil increase. Right now, the governor's budget shows $20 per pupil. So it's in line with where his budget, and his budget's based on not only the Chapter 70 funds, other revenues that come in, and then apportioned out amongst the town departments, school departments, and so forth. So we didn't see, based on any real, I think a lot of the urban schools benefited the most.
Right.
From the economically disadvantaged change they made to the foundation budget and in the ELL. And we don't have a lot of economically disadvantaged students, nor do we have a lot of English language learner students, whereas the urban school district's got the pretty good increases based on the governor's budget. Again, it's going to go through many iterations. Who knows what it will ultimately end up at.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from school committee members? Okay. Seeing none, as this is a public hearing, I am now going to invite members of the public that are here in the audience to comment or ask questions, if they will. Nobody's running to the microphone. Okay. Going once, going twice. No takers. Okay, so the next step of this process is for the school committee to take a vote. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting instructed that I am closing the public hearing portion. That does not mean that I'm shutting off public comments on any other agenda topics, just on the budget. Okay, everybody's clear with that? Sorry, it's been over a year since I've handled this part of it. All right, so public hearing is now closed on the budget. So before us, the school committee is now asked to take 2 votes on accepting the presentation and accepting Dr. Brand's proposal before us. The first motion is we move to approve the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 2020 operational budget with totaling $41,939,603. It's a big number. Would anybody like to offer that as a motion? Mrs. Newhouse, thank you. Second, Mr. Ragsdale, I saw your hands first. We're going to take this as a roll call vote. Mr. Bjork had to step away. Mrs. Bryson? Yes. Mrs. Burns?
Yes.
Mrs. Newhouse?
Yes.
Mr. Ragsdale?
Yes.
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
And Mrs. Broussard, yes. Okay, so we have approved the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 2020 operational budget. The next motion we are looking for this evening is move to approve the capital requests for fiscal year 2020. Somebody like to offer that as a motion, please? Mr. Talbot, seconded by Mrs. Bryson. Again, we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Bjork had to step away. Mrs. Bryson? Yes. Mrs. Burns?
Yes.
Mrs. Newhouse? Yes. Mr. Ragsdale?
Yes.
Mr. Talbot?
Yes.
And Mrs. Broussard? Yes. Okay.
Great, thank you very much.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, we're going to take things slightly out of order because we have our student representative here, Ms. Ellie Jordan. I know she may have homework this evening that she likes to get home to, so with the will of the committee, I'm going to ask her to present her report.
Hi. So I decided to ask teachers about things going on or students who were standing out, and I really liked what I learned. Miss Desberg, an English teacher here at WHS, told me about a writing project that some students participated in. November was the National Novel Writing Month, and freshmen Jenna Daniele and Taylor McDonald, along with senior Benjamin, I can't pronounce his last name, I'm sorry. They wrote a 50,000-word novel. On top of everything else going on in their lives, they were able to write that much in the span of 30 days. Additionally, sophomores in her classes and other classes are working on preparing for the new MCAS, which I know has a lot of changes this year. The life skills teacher, Ms. Hill, informed me that her students ranging from ages 18 to 22 attend daily internships to learn and maintain job skills. Students hold internships at Salon 62, Lorraine Spada School of Dance, the Boys and Girls Club of Woburn, the Andover YMCA, the Wilmington Public Library, the Restore and Bill Ricca, and TJ Maxx. When they return to school, they often work on boxes. These boxes include activities such as sorting objects, putting them into groups, opening pill bottles, and organizing prescriptions, measuring and filling them, and etc. Another impressive performance, unrelated to academics, was a new school record by Emma Garrity on February 5th at the Middlesex League meet at Reggie Lewis in Roxbury. Emma shattered Julia Gake's previous 600-meter record. Emma ran a 1:37.4 in the 600, and I can personally say it was incredible to watch. We were all so excited and beyond happy for her. Earlier in the season, she had a hip injury, but she prevailed and pulled a successful season for herself. In the upcoming fall season, Emma will attend Bryant University as a member of their track team. And on a final note, following today, seniors will have 21 class periods left until they leave.
Ellie, as always, thank you very much for your report.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Jeez. I bet some senior parents are thinking this year went by awfully fast. They've got those tuition bills coming. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to our consent agenda. And the first item is the approval of minutes. This is from our meeting January 23rd, 2019. Could I have a motion to approve those minutes, please? Mr. Ragsdale, seconded by Ms. Newhouse. Thank you. All those in favor? Okay, and we have one abstention, being myself, as I was home ill, and Mr. Bjork is absent. And then moving on, we have some great donations to approve. The first being approval of the Sons of Italy donation to the Wilmington High School Athletics Department in support of the Sons of Italy Holiday Invitational Wrestling Tournament in the amount of $4,000. It's pretty significant. Could I have a motion to approve that donation, please? Mr. Talbot, thank you. Mrs. Burns, I saw your hand really quickly. You're writing at the same time. Thank you. Seconded by Mrs. Burns. All those in favor of that donation? That would be unanimous. And then we have approval of the Penalty Box Girls Ice Hockey Booster Group, donation of uniforms to the Wilmington High School Girls Ice Hockey Team in the approximate amount of $4,000. Again, nice significant donation there. A motion to approve that donation, please. Mr. Talbot, thank you. Seconded by Mrs. Newhouse, thank you. All those in favor? That would be unanimous, thank you. And then we have approval of the Wilmington Knights of Columbus donation to the Wilmington High School boys and girls basketball teams, who I believe are both playing this evening, in the amount of $500 for team t-shirts. Could I have a motion to approve that donation? Mrs. Barnes, thank you. Seconded by Mr. Talbot. Thank you. All those in favor? That's great. Thank you. I am always amazed by the generosity of our community groups. Moving on to the warrants, our first line. Warrants G 418, 419, 420, R 224, 225, 226, 227, 228, L 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, and food service 22. Could I have a motion to approve those, please? Mrs. Bryson, thank you. Mr. Talbot, second, thank you. All those in favor? Okay, great, thanks, that's unanimous. And then we have the payroll warrants. We've got week ending January 30th, 2019, and February 13th, 2019. May I have a motion to approve those, please? Ms. Newhouse, thank you. Seconded. Mr. Ragsdale, all those in favor? That would be unanimous, thank you. Moving on, we have warrants, Circuit Breaker 14 and Circuit Breaker 15. Could I have a motion to approve? Mrs. Bryson, thank you. Mr. Talbot on the second. All those in favor? It looks like we've got one abstention, Mrs. Burns. And finally, under the warrants, we have SPED 27, SPED 28, SPED 29. Could I have a motion to approve those, please? Mrs. Bryson, thank you. Seconded by Mr. Talbot. All those in favor? Thank you. We've got two abstentions, Mrs. Newhouse and Mrs. Burns. Mrs. Burns, I tried to go really slowly
You did a
this
great
time.
job. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Thus concludes our consent agenda. So I think that brings us on to you, Dr. Brand, for our superintendent report.
It does, and thank you again. There are 4 specific items under the superintendent's report, 3 of which have items in the packet this evening, and I'll just briefly touch upon each. The first, number 6A, Special Education Program Review. In your packet, there is a memo entitled The Same, and it provides an overview of the intention of the district in terms of moving forward with an evaluation of our special education programs. You will remember back to work and findings associated with the Coordinated Program Review recently completed by the state, or the CPR. There is an obligation for us as a district to conduct an evaluation of our special education services and the settings in which we deliver those services throughout the district. And so we're obviously moving forward to commit or to fulfill that obligation. But more importantly, not just a checkbox measure, if you will, but an important opportunity to take stock of our programs and services district-wide as we look ahead to the future. We, as you'll see outlined in the memo, the direction here that we intend to take is to enlist the services of Walker Consulting at the Walker, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Treshman Institute, or WTI. In the memo, just briefly, you'll see a number of the other districts that WTI is referred to here has recently been conducting the same type of work, the same type of program evaluations, including, most recently within the last couple of years, Attleboro Public Schools, Watertown Public Schools, and Georgetown, just to name a few. Walker has been around throughout the state and doing a lot of work in this area for many, many years, more than just a couple. Certainly from, I think I'll speak for Alice, and certainly my experience as well in terms of them as a very known entity who are very active in this field and this work. So for members of our community and the committee, think of this as a third-party, objective set of eyes coming in to take a more careful and thorough review of our programs. This is not here for any action for you this evening, but really to inform. But most importantly, as we set out to engage this work, it is with full and complete commitment that the findings of this report, once they are finished, will be shared both with this committee as well as the broader community. It's obviously a very important area of our operations and our services, and it will be with full intent that we take these findings, take stock of where we're at, looking forward for improvement. So special education program evaluation, it's anticipated that it will be completed by the end of the school year, but I'll certainly keep you apprised of what that timeline looks like as we get a little bit farther into the work. Happy to take any questions on the program evaluation if you have any.
Mrs. Burns?
Thank you. Quick question, and this may be a little premature in asking, but that seems to be my MO. Once we gather this data once this data is collected, is it, I would presume you're prioritizing those areas of most need? Is that how we will probably step off with this data, or I'm just kind of curious as if you have a rough idea or presumption right at this stage how this data is going to be looked at to address our programming within district.
It's a fair question. I don't mean to put Alice on the spot. She's certainly welcome to chime in if you will, but I'll take a shot at this. I think what's fair to say is that the findings certainly could be probably broken down as short, mid, and longer term. And recognizing that we're going to get this report towards the end of the school year, there may be things that are more immediate that we can identify or that have been identified through the report that we put into place. Of course, at the same time, if there are things that are more structural or systematic or systemic throughout the district, then that may be part of a longer-term plan going forward. Well, it won't be the case that the findings, I don't envision at this point in time, the findings of the Walker report necessarily being something incorporated into the strategic plan. I absolutely do envision a plan, priority, and goal setting that would come from this from this project that we within the district would look towards making improvements. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Item 6B does not have a document in the packet, but policy subcommittee. So in recently conversations with your chair and vice chair, it's occurred to me that really I think the time and the suggestion or recommendation here is for the committee to consider, I guess, restarting, if you will, the policy subcommittee. It's completely understandable that, for the past period of time with all that the district has contended with, there's not been perhaps the opportunity to dig in and start to review the school committee policies. It is not only just good practice, I would suggest, in terms of some sort of regular and systematic review of policies, but it's also understood that there are some of our policies that require revision or updating. And it's not a short-term thing. It takes time. It takes a lot of time to work through the policies. As you know, there are many that you operate under. But my recommendation would be to restart the policy subcommittee and to meet to start to identify a plan going forward even for the next fiscal year, knowing that not all of the work can be done then, but at least to get started. And there are some policies, I think, that as that review begins, can jump to the fore, where attention would probably be recommended. So I give that to you. I'm not sure if you'd like to discuss or.
The only comment I was going to add here is just a refresher of who is currently serving on our policy subcommittee. We have Mrs. Bryson, we have Mr. Bjork, and we have Mr. Ragsdale, with Mrs. Burns being our alternate. For the public's information, no more than 3 school committee members can be on a subcommittee at any given time. Of course, if we have more than 3, then it becomes a quorum, and then it's an actual school committee meeting, not a subcommittee meeting. So I share that. And talking with Mrs. Bryson, our vice chair, and also with Dr. Brand, and going through a very cumbersome binder of policies. I know we're pretty good about addressing those policies or suggested policies that take immediate precedent, but there's an awful lot of them that kind of get buried in that big binder, or it's online as it sits now, and there's a lot you got to scroll through to find what you're looking for. So our sincere hope is that we can revisit that. We can make sure that things are as up to date and as clear and as aligned to state and federal law as they need to be. And the ultimate goal is to make it a little bit easier to find things on the website.
Indeed.
Without having the public having to scroll through pages to try to find something. Anybody else like to make any comments on that? Mrs. Bryson.
So I think that, so I'm happy to take the lead at this point and just sort of getting something in the calendar. Last year, when we reviewed some policies related to transportation, and there were some other things we reviewed, and there was someone from who was with us. And so would that be the case? Would we be including some support from one of you?
Yes, most certainly.
Okay, and do we know who that might be, or should we just?
Well, I think it might depend on the specific area.
Of what it is.
Certainly,
Okay.
I think it would be, I'll volunteer myself.
Okay.
I think that's an important, at least,
Okay.
step, and I'll certainly engage those others on the team as appropriate, but,
Okay.
yeah.
So I can coordinate, I'll send something out to coordinate something in the next
Sounds
few
great.
weeks, and then, Mr. Bjork's not here, but Mr. Ragsdale, you're good? Okay. All right, so we'll do that, and
Okay.
then we'll
Great.
provide an
Thank you.
update. Thank you.
Excellent.
Item 6C, strategic planning update, does have an item in your packet. It certainly occurred to me following our last discussion here, in which I talked about the strategic plan, that there's a lot of discussion around the plan. There's an awful lot of engagement, certainly across the community. We have, as you'll recall, almost 60 folks who are serving on the strategic planning committee. But what really perhaps is a missing piece, and the discussion last time gave rise to thinking about this, is trying to provide an outline, a roadmap, whatever you wish to maybe to refer to it as, of where this work is going. And so that's what, with the help of our consultant, who I had a couple of extensive conversations with, the memo here in the packet that I've also shared, by the way, with members of the Strategic Planning Committee, attempts to try and outline where we're going from here until the end of the school year. And of note, I think this is a recapture of the meetings that are already planned. And you will indeed note that February 14th, tomorrow, is the second planning team meeting this is the planning team, again, includes our staff throughout the district and community members, and they'll be meeting here in this room tomorrow from 2 until 5. And this maps out the various work that will be done in support of the development of the plan. I'll draw attention to a couple of key dates, and that is the school committee meetings that are here. February 27th, this was put together when we originally had that meeting, so we'll make adjustments. But you'll see through the document, my point is that there are a couple of school committee meeting dates here. And it's with the thought that our members of the committee who are on that, the larger strategic planning committee, can take the opportunity to provide both the committee as a whole as well as the community with an update on the work that's unfolding today. This certainly has to be much more than just showing up with a document in hand and seeking your approval. This is an important document, of course, going forward, and so there will be planful opportunities for the committee and the community to see this work as it's developing. I also included, along with the memo, you'll see a couple of documents that our consultant suggested might be helpful to give a sense or context of Massachusetts' approach to strategic planning, as well as a sample document from another district. So happy to take any questions if you have on that, and hopefully it's, at least to some degree, somewhat helpful.
Any comments? No? Okay.
Okay, lastly, item 6D, the Woburn Street Elementary School Principal Search Update. In your packet, there's a brief memo that outlines and a recapture of the dates. As you know, we currently have a posting out seeking to embark upon a search for the next Woburn Street Elementary principal following the recent retirement announcement by our current principal there, Mr. Jeff Strasnick. The memo highlights that the members of the committee at this point in time, they have met once already. You'll note that the posting closes at the end of the end of this week, and so really once we get back from February break, activity will kick off in earnest as that committee comes together and starts to dig in and make their work working towards finding a replacement for the Woburn Street School. And with that, happy to take any questions you might have.
Quiet group tonight.
Very much so.
You're saving
Wow.
yourselves.
Saving
right?
ourselves for old business.
Saving yourselves for old business. Okay. Here we go. All right. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
report, Dr. Brands. Moving on to old business. The first item under old business is taking a look at fiscal year 20 school calendar options. And as a school committee member who is well into my 6th year, this is my 6th go-around with the proposed calendar options. And I'll share my past experience. It's always been about a 5-minute conversation. Yep, okay, thanks, there's the date. Can we have this Friday off? Can we have that Friday off? And then we take a vote. And Dr. Brand agreed to take a more in-depth look at the calendar and come up with a couple of options for us. Actual options as opposed to, here's the calendar, yes or no. So with that, we've started a discussion about possible options. It's a lot to think about, and I know it can cause some angst in the community, and we certainly appreciate that. I'm a parent too, and I have to think about what works best for my family as well. So a couple of options this evening. I believe that Dr. Brand is going to refresh our memories on his proposed versions. He was kind enough to survey our community and our staff, and he is going to share with us some of that feedback this evening. I think we may find that helpful. It will be an opportunity for school committee members to ask more questions, perhaps share some comments. And I'm also going to invite the community. I see a couple of members of the community here tonight that might like to comment as well before we take a vote. Okay, with that, Dr. Brand.
Thank you. So in your packet, you will note a couple of items. First off, the calendar proposals, version 1 and version 2, as they have been referred to. And as well, the summary of the responses to the survey that went out to both staff as well as the community. And I'll just take this opportunity and thank 655 respondents in the community who did take the survey, and 162 staff responses. The memo in the packet does provide an overview. The raw data is actually included here as well for the responses for the various questions for the community survey. There were 6 questions, almost the same, 1 or 2 changes for the staff. The questions, again, and to recap briefly, as you'll see in the memo, was trying to probe the preference around Friday before Labor Day as a non-school day. That is to say, school not in session, which has been more typical, as I've come to learn of certainly the recent past here in the district. There's nothing in contract language that specifies that that's necessary, that school is not open on Friday before Labor Day, but it seems like it's been an approach taken here in the district. You'll see for the community that just a little bit over 46% of the community did prefer that Labor Day be the Friday before Labor Day be a non-school day. A little bit over 22% no, and 32% it did not matter. Question 2 was support making the Wednesday before Thanksgiving a non-school day. Right now, you'll know that the current structure of our schedule includes an early release day or a half day of instruction on that Wednesday. The support for making the Wednesday before Thanksgiving a non-school day by community members, just a little over 56, closer to 57%, expressed interest, if you will, or yes, positively, to think about that day in that way. 43% approximately suggested no, that they wouldn't like to see that day. So by default, that would continue with what we have in place. Question 3 was a preference for early release days at the beginning of the year. You'll recall that we talked a little bit more at length last time around the thinking behind that, the motivation behind that. And I won't go into that length now, but I'm happy to if you'd like to revisit that. This one is a little bit more complex. I struggled a little bit, admittedly, with the right questions to ask here or the right categories. The first one, a little bit over 27%. If we established a calendar by April 1st, people could support the addition of early release days. CARES came into the mix for this conversation. 20% noted that if CARES program was up and running and available, that they could support that. 20%, almost 21% of the community preferred to see as few days as possible. And this was an interesting twist, I guess, or recognition that if we did add early release days to the beginning of the school calendar, that the next district-wide early release day would not be until the end of January, and 41% approximately of the community were in support of that. Question 4, the interest in starting school year after Labor Day. This wasn't a part of any of the discussions or thinking or planning for the calendar versions proposed to you, but since we are engaging in a survey, it seemed like an opportune time to probe that. Almost, well, a little bit over 39% thought that they would be in support of starting school after Labor Day. Slightly more than that, 41% said no, and approximately 19% were indifferent, did not matter. Questions 5, also one of those areas that sometimes comes up now and then in conversations, not just here in Wilmington, but certainly I know in other communities, support for a 2-week winter vacation. And that gets into just the reality of when the holidays fall, and sometimes coming back after the holiday for a day or two. And so 40% were in support of that. 60 said, no, thank you. I wasn't interested in that.
Shoot.
Question 6, finally, desire to have Good Friday continue as a holiday. This district, as you know, does structure a schedule or a calendar, with this. I know that this is a point of some conversation in many communities. But desire to have Good Friday continue as a holiday, 23% approximately said yes, 34% said no, and 42%, almost 43% said it does not matter. Very quickly, I won't go through all of the questions that are there, but you can see the staff responses as well. There are some common themes, I think, that cross the two groups, the Friday before Labor Day as an example. But anyway, the data to help inform. And ultimately, the calendar is something that certainly comes with the vote of the school committee, but at the same time, it's an understanding that's a very important document. It's a very important guide for the school year that I think it's good to be mindful of where the thinking is around certain factors. There's only so many things that we can adjust or change, and we're trying to probe at some of those with these questions. So. With that, I'm happy to take questions if you'd like, or answer anything further.
So we'll take comments or questions from school committee members first. Mrs. Burns?
Thank you. I guess my overall, it's interesting to see the data actually spelled out this way. I guess my overall, I guess a concern or maybe even a question is that each year I know that it comes up with the first, teachers report the day before school, and they struggle to rush to meet all their meetings departmentally and to get their classrooms ready. And I know it looks different across the schools and the grades. I guess one of my concerns, because it always comes up in the contract negotiations as well, is having enough time to plan outside, not only for setting up their school, their classrooms and meeting their meeting obligations, but planning for the students they have in their classroom, whether it be through IEPs or 504s, collaborating with their colleagues, sort of, addressing that so that when the students arrive, they're prepared and they can formulate what those students who may require additional supports may require. We can get it right off the first step and not, struggle to get it all, understand it all, 4 to 6 weeks later. It's giving them the time to be able to collaborate, not only on those aspects, but, curriculum and just, and those other areas too that we're struggling to find it with our current school schedules. So, and I thought that with having the half days, and I have to be mindful too with the parents' concerns in childcare, that giving them that extra time together at the beginning of the year, that may alleviate some of those time constraints that they have. So in saying that, I think my biggest thing is the half days at the beginning of the year. And what are your thoughts on that, Dr. Brandon? Is there another way that we can try to carve out time for these things to happen? I know it maybe fall into an administrative level within the schools, but I really would like to see our staff being able to have those opportunities.
I think that, I think you may have touched upon this before. I think that the reality is with the contract that you have in place, we have, and as it speaks to the calendar year here in the district, there are two, I hope I say this right, but there are 2 days in addition to the 180 days in which students are in session. That's, according to the requirement of the state. Our contract is 182 days. And the way that we approach that is 1 day prior to the beginning of the year and 1 day on voting day. It's not atypical at all from my experience and knowledge of many other communities who, if they're, one of those days is often situated on voting day. And there's good reason, I think, for that, especially given the fact that usually school sites, not all, and this is the case in Wilmington, are voting sites. And to have the schools wide open for a flow, especially in a presidential cycle or presidential election year, really becomes very difficult to hold school. And so I think that that's how, as I've come to learn, we've backed into this. We, though, on that voting day, do, as I've come to learn, certainly here in this district, this is not the same for all districts, but have a really solid partnership, and help me out with a name, I'm drawing a blank.
Oh,
NPEN, thank you. My teleprompter's not working. Where we do partner for professional development for staff, and so that's a great example of partnering with other districts for professional development. So, and I only bring that up because some have suggested, well, maybe we should deviate from the voting, or having that, I'm sorry, as a non-school day when the election cycle happens. I think the reality, back to the question, and having only 1 day at the start of school is really difficult. It's very taxing, and I don't think this is my opinion, and I'm sure certainly our principals in the audience would concur. The simple reality is there's so much that's compressed into that 1 day. It's the only, as an example, it's the only opportunity in which the entire staff can come together. And that may not sound for perhaps a member of the community all that critical or all that important, but it's the only time that can happen. And as I've come to learn, that's even more taxing in this district with our offsetting schedules in so many buildings. I think that's a real touch upon that in the entry plan. And then coupled with that are the increasing things that just need to be attended to, not all, but many, driven by mandates from the department. And I don't mean that to sound that as a critique of the department, but there's a growing number of things that principals are asked to conduct professional training for, that we have to have staff sign off on. There's a compression of an awful lot of things into 1 day. And in my opinion, and I think again shared by others, it's simply not possible. I would love a calendar that has an additional day. I'll be very upfront about that. I think, and certainly experience that I've had, those 2 days can make a lot of difference. And so the proposal for the early release days here was really not about trying to ease necessarily students and families into the school year. I've heard some feedback that maybe that's a benefit, and maybe it is, but it was really driven at trying to identify some additional professional time, and on balance, hopefully, get the year off to the very best start we can. And that's where emerged the proposal to reorientate or resituate, the CIT day. Again, these calendars do not propose any, arguably, I would say, any additional CIT days, but rather proposes a repositioning of it. So I think at the end here, it's understood that quite frankly, the version that has the 3 early release days in a row might be an awful lot for typical families to be able to support. And I recognize that. I think that if the committee could support any additional time in the calendar, for the half days, if I may call it that, I think that would have considerable benefits for us. Whether that's 1 day, or whether that's 2 days, or whether it's 3, I think anything additional would be quite helpful.
Thank you.
Mrs. Bryson?
Have we learned more about whether or not CARES would be an option in those first early release days?
So so yes, but I'll certainly ask Paul to chime in if I miss the mark here. So chimes, my understanding is that chimes? CARES would be operational, but our current structure, as I understand it, is that it would be contingent upon which day or days of the week that a family signs up or commits to. So as I understand it, if you are a family that signs up for a Wednesday for the CARES program, and only Wednesday, then that would be the day that would be available to you. Correct?
Correct.
Any other, Mr. Ragsdale?
So I'd like to just quickly go through, I found the data really interesting, and I'm very, very grateful that we have this survey information, because I think a few things become really clear from it. The Friday before Labor Day seems like should remain a non-school day, unless there was some kind of really strong reason to change that, which there doesn't really seem to be. Of the people who cared in the community, a 2-to-1 ratio want to keep that a holiday, and then 91% of the staff. I mean, you don't see 91% approval for cupcakes. I mean, so that seems pretty clear cut. I think that making the Wednesday before Thanksgiving a non-school day also had more support than I expected for that. A majority of support in the community, and then a 60-40 support for the staff, and I think I would tend to support that. It's my sense. I think we had some attendance data on that as well, that there's just a lot of absences on those days. I know my family has contributed to them over the years, because we usually travel for Thanksgiving as well, as some other families do. After Labor Day, that also seems like people are not interested in that, especially the staff, over 72%. 2-week winter vacation doesn't seem to be something that people are that interested in. For the Good Friday, one thing that I thought was interesting about that is, and this is one thing that the survey can't really tell us, is it can tell us people's preferences, but not how strongly they're held. So for the Good Friday issue, so there are, 23% who wanted to continue as a holiday, so that's smaller than in the community, the 35% who wanted to, or who are willing to change that. But if those people being as a religious holiday, if this is something that they truly mean to observe, and then it was even higher among the faculty, 40%, then that's something that, especially on an issue of religious observance, that's something that I'm not exactly sure where it's hard to read what this necessarily means, just in terms of the percentages of the preferences, because people might have very, very strong preferences that outweigh other people's. Coming to the issue, which I think is the main thing we're really talking about mostly, is this issue of the early release days at the start of the school. I think that over the several weeks since we first started discussing this, I've become more and more uncomfortable with the idea of all 3 of those days being early release days. We already are starting with only a 3-day week to begin with, so we're starting with only 3 out of 5 days, which is something that I said in the last meeting that I'm fine with. I kind of like that idea of kind of easing into the school year. But for them all to be early release days, that we have, basically our first week of school is 3 half days, and that's all it is. It seems that also causes its own issues of getting things sort of the swing of school started. That there's not really, it's hard to set expectations for students. They haven't even seen a full day. I think about new 6th graders coming to the middle school with this radically new schedule from what they're used to, and changing classrooms and being a blue day versus a white day. And so the entire first week of school, they don't even get a single day to see what the actual routine is, and that makes it. I think that will make it harder for them to feel comfortable in their new environment and in that transition. I think it's probably true in all the schools, but that's one that sticks out to me in particular. I would definitely like to see if there's a way for us to find some extra time at the beginning of the school year. I mean, it may eventually come down into collective bargaining to see if we can change that aspect of the contract, which maybe we can, have the staff interested in, since they do seem to very much want to have some more time. But that's probably a few years away unless we want to re-engage bargaining, which is no small thing. So I could probably support maybe if we added 1 CIT day, thinking that maybe if, I don't know, the Wednesday or maybe the Thursday of that week was a CIT early release day, so that at least we can give something, there's some extra time, but the school can still start with at least 2 regular full school days, so that people are actually, learning the expectations, getting to know the routine. I think that is something that I would push for.
Any other comments or questions from the school committee? Mrs. Bryson?
Do you have one?
Well, I was just going to share that we did receive 2 emails from community members, and the gist of those emails was consistent around the theme of the early release days. Or we have a new acronym, I noticed, ERDS. So the 3 early release days in the first week. And I am going to point out, this was rather interesting to me, again, as a 6-year school committee member, this is the first time in 6 years somebody has sent the school committee such a letter and they said, thank you for your service. So I want to say thank you to that individual, because that really, you're here, thank you very much. That was very special to me, and I appreciate that. So with that, we have some folks in the audience that I suspect are here to make a comment on the school calendar, and I would welcome you to our microphone. I would just ask you to say your name and your street address. Yes, please.
Bring the microphone down.
Bring it down.
We can bring it down for you. There you go.
So my name is Teresa Smith. I live on 8 Broad Street, Wilmington. So good evening. I have 2 children that attend the Wilmington Public School System. I'm also a Wilmington High School, Public Schools alumni. So I went through the public school system here. So my main concern center around one of the proposed calendars for our students. When listening to experts in the field of education from various sources, if you look at National Education Association or the responsive classroom curriculum, which is being used in our classrooms, it explicitly states that the first week of school should be for children and teachers to establish routines, procedures, and schedules. Having half days in the first day of school would be the opposite of what educational experts across the nation recommend for our students. For example, the lunchtime routine, recess expectations, full day dismissal procedures, those will not be created or practiced as it should be during this critical time in the school year. Additionally, I spoke with many parents regarding the survey that was sent out by Wilmington Public Schools via email. Several families with 2 working parents commented that they responded to the survey in a way that best supported the teachers in our community. Regardless of how difficult it would be for their work schedules, households with 2 working parents wanted the teachers to know that they were being heard and respected. Which raises 2 questions for me. Why are parents being put in a position of choosing between supporting teachers or supporting a schedule that would be best for their children? Why weren't parents given more information and told prior to the survey that their kids' education may be negatively impacted by their response in order to make a more informed decision? As a public school teacher with experience in both general education and special education, I've taught in various districts around Massachusetts for the last 10 years. I can completely sympathize with Wilmington public school teachers who feel that more time is needed to prepare students before the start of school. However, I do not think that it should be at the expense of our students. There has to be a better solution than the two proposed schedules being presented. Teachers should be allocated more than one day prior to the start of school without cutting into our children's learning time. One possible solution is to have teachers use the full day Monday and Tuesday, maybe August 26th and 27th for professional development, and then allow students to have full 2 days of school on Wednesday and Thursday. Additionally, I had an opportunity to look at the survey results that was sent this afternoon by Dr. Brandt. I wanted to think deeply about the results and not just take it face value, because I feel like it kind of tells a fragmented story. Looking at the data of parents surveyed who like to see as few early release days as possible, added to parents who like to support early release dates only if CARES was an option, totaled 42%. I believe it is very important to look at these two together instead of fragmenting it, because if you look at them separately, they tell a different story. So if you look at them together, the 42%, this exceeds both the parents who are in support of early release days at 27% of parents, or parents who are open to scheduling early release days when knowing the next district-wide day is January, which is at 41%. So looking at them together tells a different story than looking at them separately, and I think it's important that we look at those two together. Furthermore, after much research, I was unable to locate data that looked at Wilmington public school students to see if there was a majority of families with 2 working parents. Regardless of this information, it should be noted that currently the majority of communities which border Wilmington have the same or less amount of early release days for professional development right now. Increasing the early release days to 3 more for the school calendar will almost double the number of early release days for professional development in the area in comparison to other towns. To conclude, we're all here in the best interest of the students of Wilmington, so I do urge the school committee to make decisions that will impact the children in our community in a more positive way, and I do thank you for your service.
Thank you for your time. We do appreciate it. Any further comments or questions from the school committee? And it's not intended for this to become a debate by any means. It's more of a careful consideration of all the feedback that's provided and for us to make the best decision that we can for our students. Now, District Mrs. Bryson.
So it seems to me that really the 2 calendars aren't really going to meet our needs tonight. So I'm wondering if we can make a motion for potentially a 3rd calendar that may maybe provide 1 half day. I mean, I don't know how Dr. Brand and the admin team will make this work, but 1 admin day, 1 early release day, and then the 2 full school days. Or the other thought would be, although the Friday before Labor Day seems to be clearly people want to keep that. My other thought was we could have more full days in that week, but that seems to be a definite no for the most part. So I won't even maybe request that. My other thought is this idea of preparing with the IEPs and the special education. Could we think about one of the last CIT days to do some of that work? So if we're looking the end of May, can we say that CIT day is to do some of that work? You're shaking your head like, that's not going to work. But could we reallocate a bit and say some of that work could be done prior to the end of the school year so that teachers would have a bit more time to?
Well, I don't think all your IEPs and 504s are going to be completed by that point. So I think it would be hard to prepare, and
Teachers won't know
they don't know
their
their
classes.
assignments, and there's going to be shuffling, if there's teachers shuffling around,
Yeah.
and that may not all be, I don't think that's a feasible option.
Mrs. Burns, you had,
I was just commenting that I concur with Mrs. Newhouse on that point. And I think what I've been getting fairly consistently over the years is that teachers are not prepared in the classroom for some of the kids who have 504 accommodations and IEP accommodations, whether it be getting their IEPs in time. They're creating the classrooms, are starting the new school year. I'm finding that I've heard comments, none of which are you know, their concerns that, like modification of the curriculum in certain classrooms and whatever, you know, the supports can vary so differently that some parents see their children struggle a lot longer at the beginning of the year because it's not well known. The teachers aren't well versed in you're talking about a variety of different IEPs, a variety of different needs, all in one classroom at sometimes. It's those areas that I thought that with having that additional time at the beginning of the year would give those collaborative groups of teachers who may share students an idea of formulating modifications as to how they teach with these, you know, certain students, you know, meeting those students' needs within the classroom. So that's what kind of my thought with trying to get it up and going right at the beginning of the year so that those students can engage more successfully and be on the right track as, you know, the year progresses. That was just, I don't know if I'm articulating it as well, but I'm hoping you can read between the lines.
Well, and I do want to say that I completely respect that Dr. Brand has come up with something new and different. And that we're
Absolutely.
not just saying we'll do it the same old way, that we're trying to meet the needs of our children in this way. And although it may not be the perfect way, that there's probably something in here that we can sort of play around with that might make it the perfect way.
Mm-hmm.
And having been a teacher and preparing new teachers, one day is just not enough unless they're, and many teachers, of course, are going in far before that first day to set up their spaces and set up their classrooms, but the co-planning and the digging into the IEPs and really coming up with my list of accommodations, that's gonna take just a bit of time. And so those 3 half days, sure, would be great, but if we could say, okay, we can agree on maybe 1 half day, but also urging our admin team and our district administrators to say, this second half day, this half day actually really needs to be dedicated to the needs that we've said we're adding these days for, because it could also become more of just getting ready and prepping and getting our spaces ready, so.
And I guess, sorry, how would that affect the professional development days if we're gonna take one and say this is how we would like them to prepare and get ready? You know, is that taking away from any professional development that may otherwise be planned for if we had that professional development day, say, later in September?
If I may, and that's a good question. I think that, you know, the proposal here, so first off, working with the 2 models or the 2 versions, right? We have a certain number of CIT, as we call them, CIT days, right? And those are, as I've come to learn, I mean, I would argue they're valuable anywhere, but certainly critically, they're of critical importance, again, in the district, as I've come to learn here, where it is so difficult to bring together cohorts of teachers at the same grade level teaching because the schedule is currently in place. These, beyond that very first day, those CIT days are the only time really in which we can reasonably bring together staff at the same grade level, the same discipline across the district. And so, you know, I think that as a district, we do need to think about that. You know, when you look at districts across the Commonwealth, you do see a wide variety of days that have been identified as half days or full professional days. And the half days, of course, are rightly or wrongly, there are ways to get at it being an instructional day to provide time professionally for staff to get together. Some districts have a greater number of those than others. Some districts have more full days as part of the contract. You could do a scan across the Commonwealth and you'd find great variety. For whatever reason, we're where we are, and I think we have to be mindful of that. If we were to take away or repurpose one of the CIT days to the work that we're talking about here, certainly fair to say, but there would be an impact. You know, leaving, think of my calculations, right, three days to bring together all of 3rd grade to work on the new science year, whatever you could substitute in there. So I do think we need to be mindful of that. And the proposal, again, I just would state that the suggestion, rather, in version 2 that had the CIT day moving up to the very beginning was, if not for anything else, perhaps, but twofold. One, flow, you know, that argument may be thin as it is, you know, half days of some degree of consistency, if you will. It's not the full days, and that's certainly understood. It doesn't need to be there. The CIT day could remain where it's been, at least within recent times, and that's at the very end of the month. You know, there's some things that we could move around there, but I would hate also at the same time to lose that CIT day. Because there, as I've come to learn, I've said it again, forgive me, there's just so little time I think we have. I think it's one of our fundamental strains that we're contending with across the district with our structure.
Mr. Ragsdale?
So we're clearly working with a lot of constraints here that make, you know, a perfect schedule not possible to achieve. We have, you know, contractual issues that we're working with, the different school times, what Dr. Brand was discussing about the different school ending times, which make it hard to get the staff together, and we can't, again, something we can't immediately change because the transportation and the busing is all based on that. And then parents, you know, needing to find either childcare or stay home from work the first week of school. There are, you know, whichever way you turn, there's going to be some kind of issue that can't be you know, maximized. So I think, I mean, ultimately, you know, you try to do in the totality what is, you know, what's best for the kids. Like, out of all the constraints we have, and that, you know, we can't get a perfect solution, what in the end is, you know, maybe the least bad option that we have in front of us. I would like to request as an option that Dr. Brand we talked about this a moment about some other options. So I'd like to request a schedule option that has, you know, 1 CIT day and 2 full days in the first week of school, and the Wednesday before Thanksgiving as a vacation day. Again, just trying to look through the combination of, you know, community preference, faculty preference, and again, all the other constraints that we're working with. I would at least like to have an option to consider a schedule that works that way.
So, Mr. Ragsdale, are you offering that as a motion, that we ask Dr. Brand to come up with a third version that would take everything into account we've heard this evening, the feedback that we've received in the survey, and the points you've just made?
Yes, I would like to offer that as a motion.
Would anybody like to second that? Mrs. Bryson would like to second that. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing no discussion, I would offer the opportunity for us to vote on your motion that you've made. Okay, all those in favor? That would be unanimous, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so you've been given your more work to do, please.
If anyone has any other ideas, please feel free to suggest them.
Maybe we'll have an option 4 and 5, or 6. But again, the time has come for us to truly look at what we are doing. I thank Dr. Brand and his team for coming up with some options. I also very much thank our community and our staff for sharing their honest feedback. It's helpful to us as well, because we know that this could be a change, and again, wanting to make the change that works for our families, but also what's in the best interest of our kids. Great. Okay. Right. Our next item agenda this evening is the posting of the employment contracts online. This is now the 3rd meeting that this has appeared on our agenda. And to refresh folks' memory, this suggestion was originally suggested by Mr. John Doherty. John Doherty is the chair of the Finance Committee. So he approached us asking the school committee to consider posting our employment contracts online. And he suggested this on the basis of transparency. So we have had 2 meetings worth of discussion. So I think we've been pretty transparent and where our thoughts are. This is not law, and we are under no timeline to make these changes. But as I was kind of chewing on this a little bit, crunching on it to use Mrs. Burns's terminology, we do not have a written policy as a school committee, either in favor of this or to disallow this. So it sort of made sense that you got to do the policy first, right? So sure, we're gonna vote on these contracts. I think I heard everyone say we're okay with the union contracts, Dr. Brand's contracts, but the individual contracts is not something we'd be in favor of. It'd be one thing for us to take a vote on that, but then we'd have to go back to the table and write a policy, and then as our traditional process, we do a first reading, do a second reading, and then vote on the policy. Kind of seems like putting the cart after the horse. It didn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. So, there you have it. It seems to me, and I would certainly make the recommendation that we push this off to our policy subcommittee. We've already discussed early in our meeting the need to refresh some of our policies. I think it would be pretty quick and easy to put something together. And the policy subcommittee could present it to us for a reading. Any thoughts on that? It just seems like a cleaner way of handling it. Again, we're under no time frame, so it doesn't matter. Mrs. Burns?
I have no reservations and have seen if the subcommittee can tease out a policy pertaining to that, just so that I think it's clarity purposes, and I think it only supports the transparent spirit that the request was made in.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, any other comments on that? Mr. Ragsdale?
I think that sounds like the right way to do it as well, as far as just how procedurally these types of things should be done. And it seems that it would be a pretty easy policy to write as well, so I don't think it will take very long.
It's probably a 3-line, maybe a 4-line policy, pretty straightforward. To be official, would somebody like to offer that as a motion? Mr. Talbot?
I'd like to offer a motion that we
That we're gonna refer this.
Create a policy.
Create a policy regarding
Create a policy.
posting.
I'll
Okay,
second
great.
it.
Second it, Mrs. Bryson, thank you. All those in favor? Great, that looks unanimous, Mrs. Burns.
Point of order.
Yeah.
So the motion was to create a policy surrounding public postings.
Of our employment contracts.
Thank you.
Correct, Mr. Talbot?
yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Online.
Online, we want to have that word in there. That's an
Just placed in
important.
town hall.
Right. Okay. Our third item under old business is the superintendent evaluation discussion. Again, this is the third meeting that we've had this on our agenda. And I understand by watching it on WCTV from my sofa, that it was tabled at our January 23rd meeting. So again, I'm gonna we've talked about this a little bit, how to handle the evaluation process, and I think we need to consider the timing. So when do we do it? Who participates? Because again, we all know that we are approaching an election season, and there is definitely going to be turnover on the school committee. We do have a superintendent evaluation subcommittee currently, so perhaps some thought and some discussion over how to utilize the evaluation subcommittee. And just to refresh people's memories, right now, myself is on the committee, Mrs. Bryson and Mrs. Newhouse. So just some general thoughts. I believe, Mr. Ragsdale, when I was viewing it from my sofa on the 23rd, you voiced concerns over the goals, Dr. Brand's goals being completed by the end of April. Please correct me if my interpretation was wrong.
It was just an issue that I wanted to make sure was, clear in our minds when we were looking at that so that completing the evaluation earlier means that some of the information that we may want to use in that might not be available yet, depending on how soon we do it. But I was not necessarily recommending against that.
Either way, it was just something to
Just
be
wanted to make sure that was taken into
mindful
account.
of. Okay. So with that, any thoughts or comments? Nobody jump at once. Mrs. Bryson.
So I would very much like the committee that's been working this year on so many of the goals to be a part of this evaluation. And so if that means we need to decide that we're going to do it sooner, or if that means we're going to have Mrs. Broussard and Mr. Talbot submit their work, and we'll look at that as we kind of pull it all together on the subcommittee. I don't know, that seems, either way seems to be okay, that we can have it and we can use it after the election, or we could just finish it prior to the election.
Mrs. Newhouse.
I think there's still a lot of work to be done on the goals after the election. So to do it before, it's not gonna be a full evaluation. So I think it would be helpful to get Mrs. Broussard's and Mr. Talbot's input and have them fill out theirs when they can, and then be able to pull it all together closer to the end of the year when most of the goals should be completed and more. You can give a more fuller evaluation.
Mrs. Barnes, I know it's hard to write and think at the same, right, comment at the same time, so we appreciate your efforts tonight.
Should I use my computer? I can type.
There you go.
I wanted to just say, I do feel as though I've collected quite a bit of evidence for each of the goals at this point, so I'm not sure I would feel uncomfortable. I would probably feel comfortable actually submitting some of it before the election, but I understand if other people aren't.
Mrs. Burns.
In having some experience with the evaluation, I don't think the evaluation necessarily has to be on goals completed, as opposed to, Dr. Brand did submit a timeline of his goals and of the steps in reaching their completion. So I don't think the evaluation needs to be as how successful was he in attaining those goals, but maybe look specifically to maybe the timeline that he's laid out with each step of those goals to reach the completion. And I think that in itself, as I said, being a little familiar with the questions that are asked in those, the formalized, that what DESE gives to fill out, I think it certainly could be informative in that role with regards to, the beginning of the school till now. I mean, and I believe the last couple of times we did do that, and I'm going back a couple of years now, was around the end of March, early April timeframe, just to capture those members who were transitioning off. I think it still lends very valuable in strong data. But that's just something, as I said, that's my purview, my perspective as to how I view that, because otherwise we'd be doing this at the end of June, because we'll be starting that new fiscal year and new goals, and that's just my perception as to how I look at this evaluation process.
I would just like to share, again, we've been through this process, albeit a couple of years ago when we last did it. Again, I would echo Mrs. Burns' statement and also Mrs. Bryson's comments that Dr. Brandt has already shared a lot of evidence with us so far on his 3 goals. We've been very transparent about the process. We've discussed it nearly every school committee since the start of the year. So as an individual who is transitioning off the school committee, if it was the will of the committee, I feel quite comfortable that I could write a fair evaluation pretty much now. Yes, there are some things that will not be completed in time, but to Mrs. Burns's point, I can see where we're going, and assuming that everything's followed through on, and that's your job as the school committee members to make sure that it is, I would feel comfortable with the feedback that I would be able to provide. Just to comment on the flip side, if the decision and the will of the committee was to wait to write those evaluations until after the election cycle, I know there's been a little bit of discussion about, yes, the new members participating, but Mr. Talbot and myself also being able to participate. To be totally honest, I'm not sure I would support that. I think that the committee would need a clear-cut stop. I think it gets confusing to the public if you've got old members sharing feedback and new members sharing feedback after the election. And I just wouldn't want to add to any confusion. I think there would need to be a clear stop. But just my feelings and comments.
Yeah.
Mrs.
I
Bryson.
also think for a new member there's an awful lot to catch up on. And so that requires the support of all of us to do a lot of that work in a pretty short time frame. And having been a new member not very long ago, I remember sort of that feeling at the very beginning where you're just sitting kind of trying to figure it all out and catch up on what you've missed in that year. I always think that April start is sort of an interesting time to start. I wonder, why can't we just start in the new year? I don't, but I know that's the way it works. And so it does become sort of an awkward time to shift people out and shift people in. So if we could change that, that might be, that might be great. But I'd be in support of finishing before both you and Mr. Talbot leave.
Mr. Rexdale?
I think, I forget if it was in the last packet or the one before that we had some material from Dorothy Presser. Dr. Brand, I believe you reached out to her about some of those timing issues that, and my recollection is that either way could work, that if we extended it beyond the election, then we can still use the actual evaluations that Mr. Talbot and Mrs. Broussard, create. They just obviously wouldn't be voting on anything that happens after the election, and that new members would be voting but wouldn't have necessarily an opportunity to contribute to that. I think that was
Yes.
That's one way of handling it, yeah.
the gist of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that I'm in agreement with Mrs. Broussard that I think it makes for a simpler, cleaner, and probably just a better evaluation, that it's completed by this committee who's been working with Dr. Brand all year. And I also agree that I think we have absolutely enough adequate evidence to properly complete an evaluation in the next 2.5 months. And we'll have additional evidence coming in over those 2.5 months. So I would also support completing the evaluation before the election.
So I'm hearing the general consensus is let's try to get this done before the election cycle. Would somebody like to offer that as a motion? Mrs. Bryce? So moved. Thank you. Seconded, Mrs. Bryson. Thank you. All those in favor? Okay, so we've come to the agreement that we will be tackling this in the next couple of months. And one of the suggestions that actually was a strategy we employed a couple of years ago, taking the evaluation forms that Mrs. Price had shared with us and actually putting in Dr. Brand's goals right into them now, so we can begin thinking about it and begin thinking about the evidence that's been shared with us so publicly so far, would also be helpful for us to start pulling our thoughts together. So we can certainly easily do that for the committee. And then the next question would be, we have a subcommittee. In the past, the subcommittee would take the individual evaluations and pull them into the one public document that gets shared with Dr. Brand as his whole evaluation. Of course, as soon as we do put that into one document and share it, it also needs to be shared publicly. So sometimes, again, the cart before the horse a little bit, but that's the way open meeting law works. So you may already have the answers to your evaluation before we actually give it to you. So the question would be, how are we feeling about using the subcommittee? Does anybody have any other suggestions or recommendations? Mrs.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Again, and I fully admit that I'm a creature of habit. I thought the last two processes, which I know that you yourself had headed, was just so well organized and so concise. It made it so much easier. It was difficult trying to combine the evidence into that ratio that I like that one big summary. The individual evaluations accompany it, but to kind of give a summary, and I know it was a lot of work because it was so good, taking aspects from each member's evaluations and incorporating it so that was a balanced report. And the summary also reflected the board in itself, by bringing in items. And I personally like that if the committee itself is up for that type of work. Because I think that's something else to kind of, how does maybe the subcommittee foresee themselves with regards to the organization of this? I think I wouldn't want to speak for them.
Okay, so just to refresh everybody, Current participants on the subcommittee, it's myself, Mrs. Bryson, and Mrs. Newhouse. Does anybody want to back out? No,
No,
okay.
I'm good.
And as I had said, I think 2 meetings ago, the first year is the easy year. So we have learned from past experience. So, okay. What is the will of the committee? Anybody want to offer a motion?
I'll offer a motion to use a subcommittee to pull together the final report.
Is there a second? Mrs.
All right, we have to second this.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? No. Okay. Ready to vote? All those in favor of that motion? That would be unanimous. Okay. I think we're good, right? Phew. All right. Now we've moved on to the public comment section of our agenda. No public comment, I should say any further public comment. Seeing none, okay. Subcommittee reports, and under subcommittee reports, we have the auditorium naming subcommittee update.
I'm ready.
And you're writing, look at.
I want to thank everybody for their participation in such a wonderful event, and I think the town is still discussing it. And last Sunday, as you know, we had the dedication of the high school auditorium in the name of Joanne Benton. And it was just I have to say, it was an incredible event, one of which I have to thank everybody on the committee, from Jackie Raffi, who was just you were just wonderful in organizing and assisting me in organizing meetings and getting things done and, delegating, and it was great. And Paul, thank you so much for your time, because I think without your and Peggy Kane's and Michael Kyra's input, along with George Hooper's, just knowledge of the beautiful plaque and the signage, along with Mrs. Peters' use with finding us a student artist who did an absolutely beautiful rendition of Mrs. Benton with children reading, which is just the element of what she embodied within this district. It was all about the kids with her and encouraging our new leaders and our staff and empowering them. It goes without speaking that although what our students could do, and I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see our students perform, and it was the cherry on top of the event, but Barbara Meddy really put that together in 6 weeks, and it was just incredible. And I think a lot has to be said for our performing arts staff and Mrs. Meddy as well, because without that structure, I think it only enhances the talent that we have with our student musicians and artists, and it blew us all away. And Mr. York's help too, in bringing the York team to the event and his participation. So it was Sophia Bonacorsi, who was our student artist, who just did a phenomenal time. But and Dr. Glenn and Brian, I do appreciate your participation there, because I think it only shares who she was to this community, and I think in some respect it gives you insight as to how another aspect into our community and how and what our school district means, and what what our community means to the school district. But it was just a phenomenal time, and I just can't thank everybody enough for it. And I do know Mrs. Raffi was kind enough to share a lot of touching email thanks from Mrs. Benton's family, how truly touching they were to have such a wonderful time. It was really, I guess, a celebration of her life, and it was more than just a dedication in that. And I think that was what a lot of the old staff alumni came. It was just a joyous time, and it should have been. And I'm grateful to the subcommittee for their time and efforts in bringing it all together. And if anybody would like to speak further on it, Paul, he was the wonderful MC. You did awesome. So, especially in the wake of our state reps and Senator being there, it was awesome. It was wonderful. So, would you like to share some words?
I thought it was a great event, and I really appreciate all the work that the subcommittee did, and Jackie, I have to say, kept me in line and kept all of us in line.
Wonder if she's available for private parties.
No, she told me that was the last one she's doing. And just the outpouring in the community and everything, I just thought it was just such a great event, and the student performance was just, it was perfect. It was just a nice event.
Great. Well, I echo the sentiment that was planned to say thank you to the community organizing committee. I know that was a great deal of work, but I understand it was an absolutely lovely event. So thank you to all of those involved, and especially to Mrs. Burns and Mr. Bjork for representing the school committee. So that's great. Any other subcommittee reports this evening? No? Okay. We expect to hear from the policy subcommittee at future meetings. Under correspondence, Mrs. Burns, did you receive anything?
I did not.
Okay. I have one item to share. I did hear from Selectman Jonathan Eaton, and he reached out to us just to make sure that we were aware of the High School Voter Challenge Program and the Commonwealth Civics Challenge Program, which I shared with Dr. Brand, just with the hopes that this would also be shared with Ms. Peters at the high school. And as appropriate, Mark Staffier, the social studies curriculum team leader, just to explore, see if this is something appropriate for our community. And if so, perhaps we could add a presentation or an overview to a future school committee meeting agenda. And Mr. Eaton by no means was pushing this upon us. It was merely just an FYI, and he found it interesting. So I'll share that with the committee. Alrighty, with that, I'd like to just share some upcoming meeting dates. Our next regularly scheduled meeting would be February 27th. And I just wanted to bring this to the committee's attention. I personally cannot be there on the 27th. I have a commitment with my own child. I understand that Mrs. Burns also cannot make the 27th, and that Ms. Newhouse is very hopeful but tentative.
Game time decision.
And maybe a game time decision. The only items that would possibly be on the agenda for February 27th is an update from the strategic plan and also perhaps further discussion on the calendar. But my thoughts, perhaps if it was the will of the committee, that we could push that off to a future date. My concern, if we have two of us that definitely won't be there, a third that's tentative, number 4 is our quorum. And if we don't have 4 here, we can't do anything. So I put that out there. Obviously, it's not my personal decision to make, it's the will of the committee. Mrs. Burns.
Would there be any consideration in maybe just changing the night that week, or would the
Yeah, I kind of looked at the calendar, and the only thought is on February 28th, which is the Thursday of that week, that's our date with the Finance Committee. And that is an event that traditionally all school committee members attend. Dr. Brand will be presenting his recommended budget to the Finance Committee, and we have to be there for questions. So that's already one night that this board is committed to that week. When I look at my personal calendar, that's all I got to give. Sorry, I couldn't do another night that week. Mrs. Burns?
Believe it or not, I can't recall after 7 years. I know we're assigned a time. Are we the only agenda item for that evening?
We are.
Okay, thank you.
And that meeting's taking place here, in this room. They're coming here.
Which is nice. They're coming to us. That's great. We'll be more comfortable in this room. Maybe not. I don't know. Depends on how it goes. All right. Any thoughts? I just put it out there. I would hate to have us go into a situation where we don't have quorum, and that could happen. So, Mrs. Bryson.
How long does the budget presentation typically take? Would it make sense to try and, Okay, I got that.
It can take like an hour, hour and a half.
Okay.
At some points, depending upon what the
2 hours,
questions
Okay.
it
of the
depends.
board would be.
All right. So, so I'm fine to move it to the 13th. Is that okay for the calendar discussion
The 13th of March.
of March? That's our next, so
Yes,
that would be the next
That would
meeting.
be the next meeting. We have 2 meetings in March, and I do think that that would be fine. you know, I think that any of the agenda items, we have taken a look at this. I think we could shift reasonably all of the agenda items. It might be a little bit of a longer meeting, but if the committee's on board with that, it would just delay the finalization of the calendar. But I think outside of that, I think what's clear is we're honing in on when the start date is of the calendar, and I know that that's usually right. So I think that that's pretty clear cut, and so I think it would be, we can work within that.
Any other comment, Mrs. Bones?
No comment. I'd like to make a motion to move the next school committee meeting to March 13th.
Is there a second? Is that two hands at the same time?
Tom can have it.
Tom can have the
I'll
same.
take that.
All right, put up, is there any further discussion? No? Okay.
Just, sorry, just
Yeah.
if I could just clarify, so you already do have a meeting scheduled for the 13th?
Yes.
Right, so you're, okay.
So we're
Would there-
essentially
would
not having a second meeting in
Right, you're
February.
Okay.
Right, so
Canceling.
we're really just canceling
Okay,
the.
forgive me. So let me make the motion to cancel the February 27th regular scheduled school committee meeting. Would that be more appropriate?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Great.
that'll be the motion.
You'll still second it?
I'll
Okay.
still second it.
Okay, great. All those in favor? And that would be unanimous. Thank you very much, and I appreciate everyone's flexibility. So we've got February 28th is when we will next see each other in this room for the Finance Committee date. Always an interesting meeting, and that is a public meeting. And then our next regularly scheduled school committee meeting, again in this room, will be on Wednesday, March 13th. Okay, and with that, we have one final, Mr.
One
Tobin.
thing, I'd just like to bring up the election that's coming up soon, and the fact that we only have 2 people running at the moment, and just want to put it out there to the people of Wilmington to, you know, really think hard about, you know, serving the community that's given you so much, and sign up. You only need to get 50 signatures, and you too can be a school committee member.
Wasn't that hard, right?
No, it wasn't hard. So, you know, I feel bad that, you know, we're leaving and there's only 2, and it needs to be 3, and then, you know, so get out and sign up.
Mr. Hayes, do you have any breaking news for us?
Nothing as of 5 o'clock this
5
afternoon.
o'clock this evening, okay, great. All right, one final item on our agenda this evening, and that is a motion to adjourn. Would somebody like to offer that as a motion?
Yeah, move to adjourn.
Okay, Mr. Ragsdale, Mrs. Newhouse on the second, all those in favor? Great, that would be unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your attendance.